Good morning, or from my perspective, good afternoon, Leonard. We're very glad to be able to interview you for the ESCoE Conference on Economic Measurement 2020. And I'd like to ask you, what sort of things you might think are wrong with the existing measures we have of GDP as an indicator of economic welfare, or whether you think it's actually doing quite a good job.
Okay, well, I don't think GDP is doing a good job. I think it used to be quite good at measuring well-being, but that was during an era in which quantity mattered much more than it does today, right? So we need, beginning in the 19th century, we needed more food, we needed more shoes, we needed to replace cars with horses, horses with cars. We need, we need to flush toilets, as Robert Gordon says. And quantity mattered a whole lot. But now quantity is not our problem, right? I like to say that, particularly in the US, where our bodies, our cars, and our clothes closets are all obese, right? They're all overstuffed. And what we need now is quality. We need knowledge, we need better products, we need to live longer, stuff like that. But quality is intrinsically much harder to quantify than is quantity, right? Quantitative growth is, you can kind of count up and you can't go too far wrong. But qualitative growth is just harder to measure. And that's the main thing that we're doing in the 21st century. That's what US corporations do. They focus on innovation rather than on, more efficient quantity growth.
So, would you think that the rate of quality improvement has increased dramatically over, say, the last 15 or 20 years? Or has it always been an issue? It's just that we've noticed the quantities aren't growing so much now.
I'd say it's both. One, that quantities aren't growing, and so GDP looks like it's slowing down. And I think that because we're focused on innovation, the rate of product change and quality change has really accelerated. For example, in the 1990s, it was estimated that products, BLS has estimated that the products changed every 4% each month. Products disappeared from the BLS CPI list at a rate of 4% a month, which is disappearing every 25 months. Right now, they're disappearing 5% a month or every 20 months. So that's a 25% acceleration in the rate of product change. But beyond that, we have an extraordinary change in biotech, which does not really appear in our statistics. So Moore's law basically said, we're going to double the rate of transistors every couple of years, double the amount of transistors that can fit on a chip every couple of years. So that's a 40% annual rate of growth. Well, the cost of DNA sequencing has fallen much faster than Moore's law, roughly 10,000-fold over the last 15 years or so. So, which is closer to being once every year, doubling every year. So, and we invest hundreds of billions of dollars in biotech, and it's terribly important. I mean, a number of the leading vaccines against COVID are based on this improvements in our understanding of DNA and RNA. And the value of an effective vaccine will be in the trillions of dollars. I mean, right now, the whole world has suffered a terrible economic blow. And if we can stop that, that's easily worth more than $1 trillion. We're spending billions on these vaccines, but that's a tremendous productivity improvement, which we're not going to capture very well.
No, I mean, there certainly have been suggestions that we should measure life expectancy, in a measure of welfare, in a sort of encompassing measure of welfare. But of course, COVID vaccines would only be, or that would show only part of the benefit of COVID vaccines, because even if people don't die of the disease, they don't want to catch it. And we're increasingly seeing the long run problems that can come from it. But outside the vaccine and the COVID epidemic, what are there other gains that you see from biotech, or is it something that we should that's likely to be kept in reserve for what we hope is a once in a century disaster, but it may actually be much more frequent than that?
Well, the answer is twofold, right? One is that, in fact, we're making use of biotech in many, many different directions, including, the recent announcement of the creation of a novel enzyme that eats plastic at a very fast rate and can really help us deal with, waste. Plastics have gotten everywhere and are threatening our health. But more deeply than that, we have a conundrum, which is that it used to be that species changed according to the laws of evolution, that there were random mutations, and the best mutations won out. Some of them were abetted by human selection. But now we're in a position of being able to direct evolution, to change the DNA of various species. And on the one hand, that there are tremendous possibilities from that. There are a number of diseases that could conceivably be cured with simple genetic interventions. But it's also a very scary prospect. Where does it end? I mean, we can insert genes into uh, a primate that speed up its cerebral processing, right? These are scary possibilities that we're not grappling with in any coherent way. And you know, our politics right now doesn't help us grapple with these high-level problems. So, and I would argue that there are just a lot of ways in which the economy is progressing that throw up these very deep social and ethical problems that all our institutions are having trouble grappling with. I mean, one that's very prominent in the United States right now is two-way mass communication, right? We've never had two-way mass communication until the rise of social media, which has mainly been in the last 15 years. And this two-way, and in the past, mass communication, because it was centralized, was highly regulated. But we don't know how to regulate this two-way mass communication, how to separate the humans from the bots and the foreign agents from our friends, and how should we regulate free speech, and you know, the fact that lies seem to propagate faster over social media than the truth.
You've been drawing attention to what I suppose I could describe as some downsides of technical progress. I mean, would you say that on balance, this unmeasured technical progress has been beneficial?
Overall, I think it's been very beneficial. I think that the evidence of that is that wherever you go in the world, there's been relatively widespread adoption of the new technology. I mean, there are now 2 billion smartphone users around the world. You know, social media has billions of users. So people who are now aware of the problems are using these things very widely. But you know, if they were coming on slower, I think in a lot of ways we'd be better off. I mean, take space commercialization, right? All of a sudden with SpaceX, it's become much, much cheaper to put stuff in space, and it's now people are thinking about how we could set up manufacturing on the moon, or how we could mine asteroids. But we don't have any way right now for regulating the commercialization of space.
No, I mean, I can see that, but I can also think of quite a few places where I would like to live, but the moon isn't really one of them. And I don't think I would be rushing for an early trip to Mars either. But
yes, but humans don't need to go there in order for them to be commercially exploited. And with more and more robotics and artificial intelligence, you know, this exploitation can take place without having a lot of astronauts marooned out in space.
no, well, I can see that or if or when that eventually becomes possible, it does open up opportunities that wouldn't exist if, say, factories on the moon required people on the moon to look after them. But no, if we could sort of get back to the more immediate issues, if there are all these developments which are benefiting people, why would you say they're so miserable now, in a way which is quite consistent with the idea that incomes aren't growing rapidly?
Can we take a short break?
Yes, certainly. Leonard, you've drawn attention to the rapid adoption of digital technologies, and that's consistent, of course, with the idea that there has been rapid progress. So why would you say that people seem to be so miserable at the moment in a way which is perhaps consistent with the idea that incomes aren't actually growing?
Well, so there are a number of problems. I mean, one of them is that if you actually look at what people are consuming, they're behaving as if they're better off. In that, for example, in America, everyone is driving these huge vehicles. We buy light trucks, what we call light trucks, which include SUVs and other things. And these light trucks cost 50% more than, or $10,000 more than cars. Now, so, people are behaving as if their incomes are rising. They don't care about the fact that they're buying expensive cars or that they use a lot of gas. These expensive cars use a lot of gasoline. But why are they miserable? Well, one is inequality. So right now, there are billions, there are billionaires that are being minted practically every day, right? And, in a single day, you hear about some multi-billionaire adding another $20 billion to his wealth. Most of them are men, but her wealth also. And so that's a big problem that, $1 billion is really a lot of money. It's almost inconceivable how much money $1 billion is. I mean, if you have $1 million, which is a number we can wrap our heads around, and you spend $10,000 a day, which I think gives you a lifestyle of the rich and famous, then in 3.5 months, you run out of money. But if you have $1 billion and you spend $10,000 a day, even if you don't earn anything on the $1 billion, you don't run out of money for 3 centuries. So $1 billion is really more than you can imagine spending in a lifetime. And I mean, so, and that means that what these billionaires are obtaining in some sense is power. The ability to bid more than the rest of us on something or other, whether it's politics or land or employment possibilities. So that's inequality is a big problem. The other part of that is that as the world changes very rapidly, all our human capital becomes obsolete much, much faster than it used to. So we now have this phrase we call reverse mentoring, because young people know stuff and know stuff better than a lot of their seniors who are better paid than they are. The kind of, to take one small example, the kind of statistics that go into artificial intelligence and to a lot of modern e-commerce and a lot of new growth models of are way beyond the statistics that people were being taught 20 years ago. So you have this situation where, increasingly top executives are behind the curve in terms of understanding a lot that they're responsible. And those are responsible for. And those are the, extremely well-educated, extremely bright people, right? We're all drowning in the sea of knowledge. But for those who are not well-educated, the problem is that it's very, very easy for your job to become obsolete. And a lot of people are finding their work becoming obsolete, and that puts them at the mercy of the employment market.
Yes, well, of course, that's the situation that's been aggravated by the epidemic. I don't want to take up much more of your time, but I wonder whether there are any thoughts you'd like to conclude with, please.
Well, I think that, well, let me say two things. First, our current measures of US GDP growth per capita suggest that GDP growth per capita is below 1%, which is by far the lowest it's been since going back, over the post-war period. So from 2007 forward, we've had about less than 1% GDP growth per capita. My numbers suggest that it's more like 3% growth per capita. And that we're thus understating growth by about 2%. Now, there are very wide error bands around that, but I think that there are even wider error bands around the official numbers. And that's really what the working paper that I presented at ESCoE was about. Now, I'm not disputing for the most part how fast nominal growth has been. I'm disputing how we deflate it. So that means that the inflation rate is a lot slower than we think it is, maybe 2% slower. And that means that we're deflating in the United States, that we were deflating in the United States even before COVID. And I also think that this is true worldwide, because these measurement problems which no statistical agency in the world has solved, is, the measurement problems are applied to all of us around the globe. So, but let's think about that. If we're deflating, how would we see that in the larger macro environment? Well, think how low long-term interest rates are now. If you were to show these long-term low interest rates to an economist 50 or even 100 years ago, they would have said, well, the world must be deflating. And I believe that's what these low interest rates are telling us, that we're in a global deflation. Finally, I'd like to say that, these problems are terribly hard to solve, as I've been trying to indicate, and that we really need a massive global effort to solve this problem. And we need to be pouring much, much more resources into developing new statistics, and the entire economics profession ought to be part of this effort. It's like a moonshot. But if we don't undertake this, then we're in a position where our major economic indicators are misleading us terribly. They're telling us, our indicators tell us that we're growing too slow, but arguably change is taking place much faster than we can keep up with it as a society. So I think this is terribly important, and it deserves a huge investment by all the nations in the world.
Well, thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us. I found it absolutely fascinating to hear your views on technical progress, and thank you also for coming to the ESCoE conference. Thank you.
Well, I want to say that I really appreciated the opportunity to come to the ESCoE conference, which had more good papers than I was able to see at one time. And it was great to be able to go back and look at things that I had missed. Finally, it was the first time I've presented this paper, and I really welcomed the opportunity of presented this paper at a conference, and I really welcomed the opportunity to do so.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.